Rachel stared at the glass wall of the meeting room, as if seeing the sea for the first time. But instead of a horizon, there were charts rising and falling like hostile tides. The hum of the air conditioner felt like a cold wind cutting through her skin. Her pen slipped from her fingers, as if her body had given up on sustaining the performance. In the silence that followed, her breathing came short, shallow, almost suspended. Colleagues exchanged glances, uneasy, while she tried to force a smile. The agenda moved forward like an insistent tide, pushing everything ahead. Numbers danced on bright slides, indifferent to any human pain. Rachel heard her own heart like a distant drum, pleading for truce, and she realized it was impossible to keep pretending normality. The boss's voice turned into an aquatic sound, distant, distorted. "Are you okay?" he asked, but it sounded as if directed at someone else. Rachel nodded out of habit, like someone following an old protocol. The chair seemed to sink under the weight of weeks without sleep. And then the first tear came, discreet but undeniable. She excused herself. The room sighed in relief, and the hallway received her coldly. The bathroom mirror returned a woman she no longer recognized. There was accumulated exhaustion in the corners of her eyes and in her trembling hands. Makeup, flawless in the morning, now faded like a sunset. Enough, she thought, without knowing exactly what it meant. Outside, the city roared under steel buildings and burning asphalt. Cars rushed, horns overlapped, deadlines exploded through telephones. Rachel pressed her forehead against the taxi window and closed her eyes. An imaginary breeze touched a childhood memory, close to the sea. There arose the seed of a decision that had not yet been named. The following days were a kind of programmed silence. Medical appointments, recommendations for rest, aimless walks. She tried to listen to her body as if learning a new language. Her hands reached for warm tea instead of accelerated coffee. Her eyes searched for sky, any fragment between buildings and antennas. In her notebook, she wrote signal words: rest, restart, water, horizon. Each word came like a shell found at the edge of memory. She researched coastal towns, old houses, small communities. There were photos of verandas with hammocks and mangrove gardens at dusk. And a gentle feeling insinuated itself. Maybe another life was possible. Sophie called one afternoon with honey-colored light and a voice of comfort. "If you could go, where would you go?" she asked, without pushing for answers. Rachel described a simple beach, with pale sand and warm wind. She spoke of a faded blue house, with windows facing the sun. She spoke of women arriving weary and leaving lighter. "Then go see if it exists," Sophie said, as if opening a door. Rachel understood that permission would not come from the corporate world. It would come from herself, from a small gesture entirely her own. She bought a ticket to the south with no set itinerary, and kept the notebook in her bag as if carrying a map. On the night before the trip, fear came, wearing velvet shoes. It made no noise, but occupied every room of her mind. What if I am abandoning everything for a mere whim? She thought. The answer didn't appear, only the sound of imaginary waves. She decided to trust that sound as her secret compass. When the plane took off, something inside also detached. The clouds were cotton mountains cut by the sun. Rachel smiled without obligation, a smile she didn't remember having felt. The city grew small, the deadlines even smaller. Only a good emptiness remained, space for a true beginning. The southern airport welcomed her with a humid and gentle warmth. The taxi drove along roads lined with palm trees and shallow lagoons. Mangroves bordered the edges like dark green lace. The air smelled of salt and crushed leaves, of life insisting. Rachel felt her body say yes before her mind did. The coastal town was a cluster of small, colorful houses. Fishermen arranged nets. Children chased light kites. There was a market with fruits that shone like small moons. The sea murmured through the alleys, a song without fixed refrain. Everything seemed to speak softly, even time itself. She walked barefoot on the sand, testing the rhythm of the tide. Each wave unraveled a hurried thought, washing away leftover noise. The wind traced paths through her hair, like patient fingers. Her skin recognized that old, elemental embrace. Rachel found the first piece of herself that was missing, on a street parallel to the beach. She saw the house with blue windows. The peeling paint looked like maps, and that enchanted her. The garden, half wild, breathed freedom without asking permission. A wooden gate creaked as if telling stories. There lay the promise of a discreet and true refuge. The local realtor opened the door with a low-tide smile. "She needs care, but has good bones," she said warmly. The old floor creaked under her steps, like a reliable old ship. The living room received light as if it were hungry for mornings. Rachel walked through it slowly, in grateful silence. In the backyard, a corridor of shade led to a rustic deck. The sea, just steps away, breathed nearby like a gentle animal. Cloves perfumed the air, subtle and warm. She imagined hammocks, lemongrass tea, soft voices at dusk, women arriving weary and leaving with eyes like water. The realtor spoke of renovations, permits, and small challenges. Nothing sounded discouraging, just part of a rite of passage. Rachel noted down costs, deadlines, contacts for builders and electricians, and beside the numbers, she drew a shell and a leaf, signs that her heart was planning to dot at the corner cafe. She tasted coconut bread that melted slowly. The cafe owner asked where she was from, without intrusive curiosity. Rachel said from far away, and the two laughed like old friends. The conversation drifted to rains, tides, and street festivals. The town was, delicately, adopting her dot. At sunset, she sat on the public deck and listened to the herons. The sky moved through shades of peach, copper, and violet. A child threw a stone, making concentric circles of joy. Rachel opened her notebook and wrote, "Nature's embrace, an ecological retreat." Then added, "To welcome, to sustain, to give back." With nightfall came a calm that was not absence of sound. It was presence of self, a reunion without an audience. She knew the path would demand courage and care, but for the first time in a long while, courage didn't hurt, and care seemed like a form of love she could learn. In the simple room of the temporary inn, she made a plan. Small steps, flexible schedule, honest budget, seek reclaimed wood, clean energy, a culinary garden, invite the community for workshops and open dialogue. Tomorrow, she thought, I'll begin with the gate and a cup of tea. Rachel returned to the Blue House the next day, determined to see it calmly. The walls still held the scent of sea air and old wood. Every creaking door seemed to tell stories of forgotten summers. The high ceiling let the light dance in golden beams on the worn floor. She imagined herself there, listening to waves while serving tea to guests. Upstairs, the rooms were empty and silent. Windows facing the sun revealed wide views of the sea. The torn curtains swayed like flags of surrender. Rachel ran her fingers over the chipped windowsill, dreaming of renovations. The place called for life, colors, voices, laughter, and renewed footsteps. In the backyard, twisted mango trees offered shade and sweet fruit. A battered wooden bench waited for someone to restore it. The wind carried scents of salt, herbs, and damp earth from the night before. Rachel imagined gardens, short trails, and meditation corners. It was more than a house, it was a future and potential. The realtor watched Rachel with a mix of curiosity and tenderness. "Few people are interested in something so simple," she said softly. Rachel smiled, as if receiving a disguised compliment. "It's exactly this simplicity that I'm looking for," she replied firmly. There, she made the decision not to turn back. At the local registry office, she signed the papers with slightly trembling hands. The final stamp sounded like a drum, announcing a new cycle. Rachel stepped into the street feeling as though she breathed differently. The air seemed cleaner, fuller, more possible, and each step echoed like a beat in her heart. Sophie celebrated over the phone with conspiratorial laughter. "Now you have your own blank canvas," she said cheerfully. Rachel knew it wouldn't be simple to fill that canvas, but the image of women being welcomed was already clear. The ecological retreat had been born, even if still invisible. On the first night in the house, she lay on the living room floor. She heard the waves in the distance, like a discreet choir. The ceiling creaked, but seemed to sing in tune with the wind. Rachel closed her eyes and felt her heartbeat slow down. The house embraced her imperfect, but promising. In the middle of the night, rain poured hard, testing the tiles. Rachel rushed to place buckets under the leaks. She laughed to herself, tired, as if it were already part of the adventure. Life was reminding her that dreams also drip into buckets, and that every construction begins with patience. By morning, the sun entered through the windows like a welcome guest. The damp walls glowed in shades of gold and hope. Rachel opened her arms, receiving that embrace of light. She took a deep breath, knowing she was in the right place, and she promised to care for that space as she would for herself. The first days were a mix of enthusiasm and worry. Rachel made endless lists of repairs and expenses. Every wall demanded paint, every window begged for fixing. The numbers in her notebook grew like storm waves, and the silent question appeared: could she really sustain this? Michael showed up, recommended by neighbors as a skilled carpenter. He had steady hands, a calm voice, and eyes that read wood. He looked over the house and said, "She needs patient care." Rachel laughed, recognizing the metaphor for herself. She decided to hire him, trusting the simple wisdom of his words. During a break, they sat in the yard under the mango tree's shade. Michael told stories of the village, of winds and tides. He spoke of how the community valued tradition and distrusted change. Rachel realized it wasn't enough to restore walls, she'd have to win hearts. That thought made her uneasy, but also more determined. Sophie visited one rainy weekend. She brought books on sustainable tourism and mindful hospitality. "You're ready to become the guardian of this place," she said, smiling. Rachel wanted to believe it, but anxiety throbbed like a constant wave. The weight of possible failure lingered in her thoughts. At night, Rachel walked alone along the beach, asking the sea for answers. The broken shells reminded her that even beauty endured pressure. She collected a few, keeping them as small reminders. Each one whispered, even broken, "I can still be beautiful." It was the message she needed to hear. The renovations moved slowly, and the costs grew faster. Rachel reviewed spreadsheets, cut expenses, and negotiated deadlines. The fear of failure came like a rising tide, pushing everything, but the glow of each restored corner kept her steady. She knew giving up would cost even more. One afternoon, a group of locals approached curiously. They asked about her project, but in a cold, distant tone. Rachel explained, trying to share passion and clarity. She noticed skeptical looks, as if they saw something too fragile. She left that conversation carrying the weight of judgment. Alone in her room, she cried quietly, without witnesses. It wasn't regret, but exhaustion and loneliness. She wanted to call Sophie, but didn't want to sound defeated. She took a deep breath, recalling her original promise. She vowed not to abandon the dream at the first storm. The next morning, she swept dry leaves from the yard. Each movement was also a way of clearing her mind. The wind brought the scent of the sea mixed with new flowers. Rachel lifted her face, accepting that doubts would be part of it, and decided to continue, even if with small steps. Rachel woke up early, determined to turn dreams into bricks. The sound of the waves served as a soft, constant alarm clock. Michael arrived with tools and a discreet smile of routine. The two began with the gate, symbol of future welcomes. Each hammer blow sounded like the beat of a renewed heart. During breaks, Michael shared stories of the village. He spoke of fishermen's festivals, harvests, and traditions. Rachel listened attentively, trying to absorb every cultural detail. She knew her project needed to converse with that history. A retreat would only make sense if it respected the land's roots. At the end of the day, Sophie called to hear the news. Rachel described dust calluses and growing enthusiasm. "It's just the beginning, but it already feels alive," she said emotionally. Sophie laughed on the other end, celebrating each small step. "Keep going, Rachel. This house will return what you give it." At night, Rachel reviewed notebooks and budgets by candlelight. The power had gone out, but it didn't discourage her. She wrote keywords: welcome, simplicity, nature, hope. She felt those 4 pillars would sustain the future, and fell asleep with the breeze entering through freshly cleaned windows. The weekend brought curious neighbors to the gate. Some offered fruit and advice, others only cold stares. Rachel smiled at everyone, trying to show transparency and goodwill. She knew trust couldn't be bought but built, and she was willing to pay that price with patience. Work continued with painting, fixing tiles, and contained laughter. Rachel dirtied her hands without hesitation, learning from each mistake. Michael taught simple techniques, turning difficulties into lessons. Each restored corner returned dignity to the old house, and with it, Rachel also felt rebuilt. One afternoon, an elderly woman appeared with a corn cake. She said the house had always been a place of gatherings and parties. Rachel thanked her, moved, feeling the gesture as a blessing. It was as if the past had granted permission to the present. The woman smiled. This house always wanted to be full of life. Rachel began walking every morning along the beach. It became a ritual of energy, breathing, and clarity. There, ideas for future activities in the retreat emerged. She thought of sunrise yoga and natural cooking workshops. The sea was now her silent consultant. At night, she wrote in her journal her small victories. Each detail seemed part of a larger mosaic. Rachel realized that restarting meant adding bricks of courage, and that each step supported not just the house, but herself. The ecological retreat was already breathing in the rhythm of the tide. Despite the progress, not everyone welcomed Rachel with open arms. Some locals murmured that she wanted to strip the village of its character. Others feared that tourists would change the town's quiet rhythm. These voices echoed discreetly on the corners, but reached her ears. Rachel felt the weight of these comments like a tide against her boat. Michael tried to reassure her while repairing the old roof. "They just need to see that you're sincere," he said firmly. Rachel nodded, but insecurity still pulsed silently inside. She didn't want to be seen as an intruder, but as a partner. That fine line demanded delicacy in every gesture. At the market, she noticed distrustful glances when buying fruit. Conversations quieted as soon as she approached. Still, Rachel kept smiling, refusing to return hardness. She carried bread, flowers, and fresh fish, as if planting roots. Small gestures were seeds of trust sown slowly. One night, she heard voices near the wooden gate. Two young men laughed at the renovation, calling it a foolish whim. Rachel didn't confront them. She only watched from inside the house. She knew respect would come, like a slow, patient tide. But each word of disbelief weighed like a stone on her shoulders. Alone in her room, she cried quietly, unseen. It wasn't regret, but loneliness and exhaustion. She wanted to call Sophie but swallowed the impulse. She chose to trust what she had already built so far. The promise she had made to herself was bigger than fear. The next morning, she swept dry leaves from the yard. The simple movement seemed to clear heavy thoughts too. The wind brought the scent of the sea mixed with new flowers. Rachel lifted her face and breathed deeply. She decided that each day would be a vote of persistence. Michael found her reflecting in front of the house at sunset. "Everything worthwhile begins with resistance," he said calmly. Rachel smiled, grateful for his unexpected firmness. The house seemed to listen, creaking softly in response. It was as if the very space asked her not to give up. Night, she wrote in her journal, patience, resilience, faith. These three words became visible pillars in her mind. The project was still fragile, like a sprout in dry soil, but it already showed signs that it could bloom. Rachel lay down believing spring would come. On the beach the next day, she found broken shells. She kept some in her pocket as silent reminders. Even broken, they still had beauty and purpose. So too was her dream, unfinished but alive. Rachel walked lighter, ready for what was to come. Clara arrived on a cloudy morning, carrying a small suitcase. Her face revealed sleepless nights and the weight of responsibilities. Rachel welcomed her with a smile, even amid renovations. "It's not all ready, but the essentials already exist," she said firmly. Clara nodded, as if seeking more comfort than luxury. Rachel prepared a simple room with clean sheets and fresh flowers. The scent of lavender filled the air, bringing immediate calm. Clara sighed as she lay down, as if releasing years of tension. The open window revealed the sea breathing in slow waves. It was the first sign that the space was already working. In the following days, Clara walked silently along the beach. She collected shells, as if gathering pieces of herself. Sometimes she read in the yard, other times just watched the trees. Rachel prepared light meals, highlighting fruits and local fish. The slower rhythm brought color back to her face. Michael noticed the change and commented while making repairs, "This place is already doing what it was born to do." Rachel smiled, surprised at the recognition coming from him. It was as if the house were alive, healing those who arrived, and also healing Rachel herself. Quietly, Clara began to talk more over the week. She spoke of her recent divorce, loneliness, and lack of hope. Rachel listened attentively, without offering ready-made solutions. She simply allowed the space to embrace every painful word. It was as if the tide carried pieces of sadness away. On the seventh day, Clara woke up different, with brighter eyes. She said she had slept well for the first time in months. She wanted to help Rachel in the kitchen, making a simple cake. They laughed together, like old friends on an ordinary afternoon. The retreat was beginning to create genuine human bonds. At farewell, Clara handed over a handwritten letter. She thanked her for the hospitality and the restoring silence. She said she had regained strength to restart her life. Rachel kept the letter as a discreet treasure. It was proof that her dream was on the right path. Sophie called that same day and heard the story with emotion. "This is it, Rachel. You are already fulfilling your mission." Rachel cried with joy, feeling the weight lift from her shoulders. She didn't need to wait for the future. Transformation was already happening. Nature's embrace had given its first real embrace. With Clara's departure, news of the retreat spread discreetly. Some women from the village began to seek Rachel. They wanted just a day of rest, a quiet meal. Others asked about lodging for visiting relatives. The house was beginning to breathe movement beyond renovations. Rachel organized small activities without much planning. Light yoga on the porch at sunrise, short walks along the beach at sunset, tea circles in the yard, with laughter and simple stories. Everything flowed effortlessly, like a natural tide. Michael watched curiously, noticing the different energy in the air. "Now the house has voices again," he said with a smile. Rachel realized that even the rooms seemed brighter. It was as if walls, windows, and tiles were celebrating too. The place was no longer just hers, but everyone's who arrived. Sophie brought a group of friends for a weekend. They helped paint colorful murals on the outer walls. Laughter, music, and brushes transformed the tired facade. Rachel cried upon seeing the house dressed in new colors. It was as if the gray past were replaced by hope. Word of mouth began to extend beyond the village. Curious travelers arrived, drawn by local stories. Rachel welcomed them with simplicity and genuine care. No luxury, only authenticity and hospitality, and that seemed worth more than any artificial comfort. The finances were still a daily and persistent challenge, but the positive energy of the guests made up for the worries. Each smile was like payment in another currency. Rachel understood that value was not measured only in money. It was also about human impact and personal transformation. One starry night, Clara returned unexpectedly. This time she smiled more lightly, with steady steps. She brought flowers and said, "I wanted to show my new beginning." Rachel embraced her, moved, as if reuniting with family. Nature's embrace already had its stories of return. The community, once resistant, began to change, little by little. A neighbor brought fresh fish, another offered extra chairs. Small gestures showed that distrust was giving way to partnership. Rachel felt she was earning a legitimate place. The retreat was becoming part of local life. At the end of a busy day, Rachel stayed in the yard. The mango trees swayed, the sea sang, and the moon watched. She took a deep breath, letting gratitude fill every cell. Nature's embrace was also life's embrace, and Rachel knew she was exactly where she should be. The retreat was beginning to gain life, but also new challenges. The bills rose like high tide, always a little beyond expectations. Unexpected repairs appeared in pipes, tiles, and forgotten furniture. Rachel spent sleepless nights reviewing spreadsheets and numbers. The guests' joy contrasted with her silent anxiety. Michael noticed the fatigue etched on her face. "You're trying to hold up the world alone," he said compassionately. Rachel sighed, recognizing her difficulty in asking for help. She was used to solving everything without showing fragility. But here, vulnerability was also part of the learning. Clara, in a brief visit, noticed the tension and offered support. "You've already done more than you realize, Rachel," she said firmly. She shared how her life had changed after her stay. She was living proof that the effort had real impact. Rachel cried quietly, comforted by the reminder of purpose. Still, debts weighed like stones in the tide. Money came in slowly, left quickly, and none remained. She began cutting small comforts to keep the work going. She cared for each cent as if watering a rare plant, but feared the soil might not be fertile enough. At night, she wrote letters to potential partners and supporters. She dreamed of creating packages for sustainable stays. She wanted to attract people searching for more than tourism. She wanted them to come for transformation, not just rest. That desire guided each line written with hope. Loneliness was also an invisible obstacle. There were days when the house felt too big. Rachel missed constant company, laughter at the table. The sea filled some of that emptiness, but not all. She wondered if she was prepared to walk alone. Sophie called whenever she could, sending encouragement and ideas, but the distance made it hard to keep the bond daily. Rachel learned to trust silence as an ally. It was there that the most unexpected answers arose, and each sunset seemed a reminder it was worth it. One night, while reviewing accounts, Rachel almost gave up. The weight felt heavier than her shoulders could bear, but she remembered Clara's eyes on the day of farewell, and thought of the women who would still come seeking refuge. That memory was enough to not abandon the dream. The next morning, she decided to write on the gate, "Nature's Embrace, a place for new beginnings." The words were simple, but had symbolic strength. Rachel smiled, as if letting the world know her mission, and suddenly, the house seemed to smile with her. With the name visible on the gate, the retreat drew new attention. Some curious locals began visiting with less reserve. Local women offered recipes, fabrics, and flowers for decoration. Rachel saw signs that the community was beginning to accept, but acceptance also brought unexpected challenges. One local investor approached Rachel on a sunny afternoon. He had a sophisticated appearance and a convincing speech. He spoke of turning the space into a luxury resort. He promised quick financial return and national visibility. To him, simplicity was a waste of potential. Rachel listened in silence, feeling the weight of temptation. The debts echoed like an insistent chorus in her mind. The proposal seemed like the practical solution to all problems, but it also sounded like a betrayal of the original purpose. Her heart beat hard between reason and conviction. That night, she couldn't sleep from worry. She imagined guests in cold, impersonal corridors, the laughter of women replaced by luxury protocols, nature losing its embrace to make room for concrete. That image shook her more than the debts did. Sophie was the first to hear about the proposal. "Rachel, you need to decide what truly matters." The words came firm but full of care. Rachel knew Sophie was right. The dilemma wasn't about money, but about identity. The next day, she walked along the beach seeking clarity. She picked up a broken shell and held it tightly. "Even broken, I am still part of the sea," she thought. She understood her mission could not be sold. The retreat's value was greater than figures. The investor returned, expecting a quick answer. Rachel took a deep breath, facing him calmly. "This place was born to welcome, not to exclude," she said firmly. She refused the proposal, even knowing the weight of the decision. The silence that followed was full of dignity. Michael smiled when he heard of her choice. "Now the house knows you won't abandon it." Rachel felt proud for holding on to her vision. Even if the future was still uncertain and challenging, integrity was her greatest achievement so far. That night, she lit candles on the porch and made tea. The wind swayed, the light curtains in the open windows. The sea murmured as if approving the decision made. Rachel wrote in her journal, "Purpose above profit," and she fell asleep with peace in her heart. Summer brought days of strong heat and clear skies, but a strange wind began to blow on the horizon. Fishermen spoke of heavy clouds far in the distance. Rachel watched the sea change its color and mood. Nature seemed to warn that something was approaching. That afternoon, the sky darkened faster than usual. The palm trees bent under sudden, firm gusts. Rachel rushed to close windows and protect fragile furniture. Michael appeared to help, his face worried. "This one will be strong," he said, tying the gate with ropes. The storm arrived with fury, mixing wind and water. Tiles flew, walls trembled, trees split in half. Rachel hugged herself in the corner of the living room. Each thunderclap sounded like a blow against her courage. The retreat seemed to crumble along with her hopes. The sound of the waves grew deafening and threatening. The sea invaded part of the yard, dragging plants and furniture. Rachel cried, powerless before the overwhelming force. Michael shouted instructions, trying to save the essentials. It was like fighting against an invisible giant. By midnight, the storm finally weakened. The silence that followed was almost painful. Rachel stepped outside and saw wreckage everywhere. Tiles scattered, windows broken, walls soaked. The house seemed to weep along with her. She sat on the wet ground, hugging her knees. Doubt returned like a shadow. Had this been a mistake? All her efforts seemed small before the destruction. "I can't do this anymore," she murmured through sobs. The sea.com now gave no reply. The next morning, neighbors came to see the damage. Some shook their heads in heavy silence. Rachel felt ashamed, as if she had failed them all. The dream seemed to collapse before her eyes. She seriously thought of giving up. Sophie called when she heard the news. Rachel could barely speak, only cried into the phone. "Don't give up now, you've come further than you realize." The words cut through the pain like a distant lighthouse. Rachel held on to that thread of hope in her heart. Michael approached with a firm promise. "You're not going to rebuild this alone." There was determination in his tired eyes. Rachel took a deep breath, feeling strength quietly return. Perhaps there was still a future among those ruins. The next day brought timid sun and the smell of wet earth. Rachel woke early, determined to face the wreckage. She began by collecting broken tiles and soaked furniture. Each gesture was painful, but also liberating. It was like separating what could be reborn from what had already gone. Michael brought reclaimed wood and tools. "Let's start with the roof," he said confidently. Rachel grabbed a hammer and climbed the ladder with him. Her hands trembled, but her heart was steady. Working side by side restored rhythm and courage. Soon, neighbors appeared spontaneously to help. Some brought nails, others offered food. Children gathered branches from the ruined yard. Little by little, the house gained new life. As a team, the village was beginning to see value in the project. Rachel cried discreetly at seeing such solidarity. She hadn't expected support from those who once distrusted her. Helping seemed to unite everyone around a common purpose. The house was no longer just hers, but the community's, and that changed everything inside her. Clara arrived with flowers and words of encouragement. "I couldn't stay with my arms crossed," she said, moved. Together, they cleaned the gardens and replanted aromatic herbs. The yard once again smelled of freshness and hope. Rachel felt she was rebuilding not only walls, but bonds. The nights were tiring, but different now. Around the table, they shared simple meals and laughter. Voices filled the house with renewed life. Rachel understood that the storm had brought more than destruction. It had also brought the sense of community that was missing. Little by little, the rooms became livable again. Walls painted, windows fixed, furniture restored. Each detail bore the mark of different hands. The retreat was no longer the work of one person. It was the fruit of bonds woven through collective effort. At the end of the week, Rachel lit candles on the porch. She looked at the sea, now serene, reflecting the moonlight. Her heart beat in rhythm. At peace with the present. She knew storms would return one day, inevitable, but now she was certain she wouldn't face them alone. Sophie arrived at the end of the month to visit. She was delighted with the transformation of the space. "It's more beautiful than before the storm," she said. Rachel smiled, proud but humble. She understood that beauty also came from well-cured scars. In her journal, she wrote a striking phrase: "Everything the storm destroyed, unity rebuilt." She kept the page carefully among dried shells, and fell asleep feeling that the retreat, at last, could breathe. Nature's embrace had survived its greatest test. The reborn retreat called for ideas worthy of its courage. Rachel designed a program that breathed nature. Yoga at sunrise, gentle walks among mangroves, cooking workshops with herbs picked from the garden, guided silence to listen to one's own heart. Michael helped build a deck for meditation. He used reclaimed wood, firm and full of history. The wind passed gently through the handmade gaps. The sea provided a patient and constant soundtrack. There, time seemed to learn how to walk barefoot. Sophie proposed sharing circles on Wednesday evenings, honest conversations, without hurry and without judgment. Every voice found space to exist whole. Rachel guided with listening more than with words. The group closed like an embrace that doesn't tighten. The first weekend bookings arrived. 2 friends from the big city, a grieving couple, a teacher seeking pause, 3 sisters in restart. The house adjusted its rhythms to welcome well. The gate creaked happily, as if saying welcome. Rachel formed partnerships with local producers. Fruits, fish, bread, and flowers traveled short routes. The kitchen served simplicity with a taste of truth. Guests praised the care in every detail. The village noticed benefits flowing back home. The calendar began to fill with color, without fanfare, but steadily, the dates filled. Small groups kept the soul of the project alive. There was room to learn names, stories, and silences, and the modest finances began to breathe easier. Rachel implemented a simple reservation system, organized spreadsheets, clear policy, kind communication. She learned to say no when necessary and fair. She protected the tranquility that made everything exist. Purpose guided each decision like a compass. At night, the deck received entire constellations. Guests lay on blankets, breathing in sea air. They whispered wishes into the attentive darkness. Rachel watched faces slowly soften. The retreat kept promises that needed no stage. In the mornings, steps were as light as breeze. Layers of fatigue remained on the wet sand. Hands that once trembled now held cups firmly. Eyes, once dull, gained a gentle glow. Transformation had the exact rhythm of the sea. In her notebook, Rachel wrote in calm script, "To create is to keep the essential safe from noise." She closed her eyes and heard waves in steady compass. She felt her whole body settle into a safe place. New horizons finally fit inside her. Clara returned with a smile. The house recognized. She brought flowers, notebooks, and a glow of resolution. "I want to talk about walking by your side," she said. Rachel offered tea and the sunny yard. The wind turned a page on its own, like a good omen. Clara presented a proposal with steady hands, fair partnership, defined roles, sustainable goals. She would take care of communication, hospitality, and experiences. Rachel would oversee operations, curation, and vision. Together, they would share strategic decisions and risk. Michael listened from afar and nodded silently. He knew the project needed more than one pillar. Sophie celebrated over the phone, laughing with joy. This is growth with soul, just as we hoped. Rachel felt gratitude rise like a gentle tide. Even so, caution asked for a chair at the table. They spoke about boundaries, rest, and preserving the place. No overcrowding that would break the essential silence. They preferred to lose bookings rather than lose meaning. Small choices safeguarded great treasures. Clara suggested monthly themed gatherings, days of new beginnings, cooking with the season, walking while listening. Simple activities, without grand promises. Depth would be born from true encounter. Rachel saw the plan fit like a shell in her palm. They wrote a clear agreement with no fine print. Transparency was the ink with which they signed. They promised to care for the house as if for a living being. Every decision would pass through the filter of purpose. Profit would be consequence, not lighthouse. The village received the news with serene curiosity. Some toasted with fresh lemonade in the square. Others brought chairs for the next sharing circle. It was the community yielding another step of trust. The house shone quietly under the afternoon sun. In the first week of the partnership, everything gained rhythm. Clara refined communications with words of shelter. Rachel adjusted routines to allow space for care and rest. Guests noticed the harmony without it being announced. The experience became even more whole. At the end of a themed gathering, there was a beautiful silence. No one wanted to break the peace that had settled lightly on the deck. Clara and Rachel looked at each other with certainty in their eyes. They were on the path promised from the start. The sea clapped quietly at the edge of the beach. In her journal, Rachel wrote with decisive strokes, "Partnership is when two solitudes become a home." She put away the pen, embraced the night and the scent of salt. The moon drew a liquid silver road across the water. The future waved from afar, patient and luminous. The sun rose lazily, painting the sea in gold. The retreat was silent, but it was a silence full of life. Rachel walked through the yard, observing green, blooming gardens. Every corner carried the marks of different hands, of intertwined stories. It was more than a house, it was a collective heart. That day, guests from many places were gathered, women of different ages, couples, entire families. The retreat had become a destination for those seeking a restart. It wasn't luxury that attracted them, but the promise of peace. The gate creaked softly, like an old smile of welcome. Rachel prepared coffee and fresh lemonade for everyone. The aroma mingled with sea air and birdsong. Conversations were gentle, punctuated with loose laughter. Clara organized a sharing circle under the mango tree's shade. Michael arranged wooden benches, tending to quiet details. In the circle, each person shared fragments of their journey, stories of loss, of restarts, of small, everyday miracles. Rachel listened intently, receiving each word as a gift. She realized the retreat was more than a physical space. It was a mirror where everyone recognized themselves renewed. When her turn came, Rachel took a deep breath. She spoke of the collapse that had changed her life months before, of fear, of loneliness, of the storm that nearly took everything, but also of the community's embrace and helping hands. Her words fell softly, like summer rain. People applauded with tenderness, not with noise. It was applause of respect, recognition, and gratitude. Rachel looked at Clara, whose eyes shone with joy. She looked at Michael, who nodded silently, as always. And she looked at the house, which seemed to breathe with them. In the afternoon, they walked together to the beach. The sea was calm, deep blue, welcoming. Some dipped their feet, others only gazed at the horizon. Rachel closed her eyes, feeling the wind as a blessing. There, she knew she had found exactly what she sought at sunset. She lit candles on the meditation deck. The sky filled with stars, and silence was sacred. Rachel wrote in her journal, "What began in me has become us." She closed the notebook with steady hands, without a tremor. The future was no longer a threat, but a promise. On the last page, she left a phrase for herself: "Sometimes, to find yourself again, you just need to let nature embrace you." The waves tapped gently, as if signing below. Rachel smiled, a tear of gratitude slipping down her cheek. Nature's embrace had become much more than a dream.